Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. At a Chicago public high school in the Hyde Park neighborhood, Room 214 was known for its heated debates. Mr. Carter's philosophy class attracted both curious students and those seeking intellectual confrontation. It was a place where ideas collided, sometimes respectfully, sometimes tensely. That morning, the pale spring light streamed in through the wide-open windows, blending the distant sound of sirens and animated conversations in the hallways with the studious atmosphere of the classroom. Mr. Carter, a man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard, wore a serious but slightly condescending expression. His reputation as a committed atheist and fierce defender of the scientific method preceded him. He was keen to ensure that his students understood that reason and science should always take precedence over belief. He walked slowly in front of the blackboard, on which he had written, "Faith versus Reason." His tone was calm, almost professorial. "My dear students," he began, his hands clasped behind his back, "all beliefs must be based on solid evidence. Without scientific proof, there is no rational reason to believe in God or anything else." He looked around the room, seeking approval. Several students, especially those accustomed to debates, nodded in agreement. Their faces expressed quiet confidence, sometimes tinged with a small, satisfied smile. But Malik, sitting in the second row by the window, frowned. He was 12 years old, of average height for his age, with dark eyes sparkling with intelligence and ebony skin that contrasted with the clothes his mother had carefully chosen. His parents had instilled in him a deep faith in God, Allah, but also a love of reflection and discussion. For him, faith was never taboo, but an invitation to understand, to question. As Mr. Carter unfolded his argument, explaining that science was the only undisputed truth and that any unproven belief was just another myth, Malik felt his heart pound a little faster. He had something to say, but he wanted to choose his words carefully. After a moment of hesitation, he raised his hand, timid but determined. "Sir, may I say something?" Mr. Carter turned his head toward him, slightly surprised. He nodded, almost as if testing the boy's maturity. Malik sat up in his chair, took a breath, and said calmly, "You say that without scientific proof, we should not believe. But then, how can you be sure that the milk we drink comes from a cow?" A murmur rippled through the class. Some students leaned forward, intrigued, others exchanged amused glances. Mr. Carter smirked, visibly amused by the unexpected question. "Well, Malik, it's obvious. We know it because science has shown us," he replied confidently. "Biology, chemistry, agriculture, all of this proves that milk comes from the cow." Malik smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile or a defiant smile, but a genuine, almost luminous smile, like that of a child who understands something the adults have forgotten. His eyes shone with a kind of quiet peace, unusual in a student his age. "But I, sir, have never seen a cow make milk in a laboratory," he said with a slight shrug. His voice was soft, but each word seemed weighed. "Nor can I observe the cow every day, out there on the farm. Yet every morning, I drink this milk. I trust what my parents tell me, what I see around me. I trust what I was taught. That's how I know this milk comes from a cow." A low murmur rippled through the classroom. Some students smiled. Others looked confused, as if Malik had made a remark too simple for such a serious debate. But others, the most attentive, slowly straightened in their chairs, intrigued by the direction this argument was taking. Mr. Carter was silent for a moment. He crossed his arms, thinking. He wasn't the type to feel threatened by a student's question. But there was something unexpected in Malik's words, a logic that escaped the coldness of academic syllogisms. He replied with his usual calm. "But that's not scientific proof, Malik. It's just a belief, a trust." Malik wasn't disturbed. He looked at his teacher with that calm gaze that seemed to penetrate words to their essence. "So how do you know you're breathing, sir?" A subtle shudder ran through the class. Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback. "I mean, no one can prove 100% that the air you breathe is there every second. You don't see it, you don't hold it in your hand, and yet you don't doubt it. You breathe in, and you know the air is there. It's obvious, not because you've proven it with machines with every breath, but because you experience it." The silence thickened in the room. Even the usually loudest students remained frozen, as if a subtle change had occurred. Malik placed his hands on his desk and continued, this time more slowly, with surprising maturity for a 12-year-old. Sometimes you know things because they are true, not just because you can prove them. The professor remained there, standing in front of his desk, his arms still crossed, but his gaze softer. It was no longer that of a professor teaching, but that of a man truly listening. He observed Malik with an almost respectful attention, as one regards a budding philosopher whose words transcend his years. You're right, Malik, he finally replied, his voice deeper, more measured. There are things we know without being able to fully prove them. Things we feel, things we experience, things that are obvious to us. He paused, then added, as if reminding himself of his own role. But science is a powerful tool. A tool we have to understand the world rigorously. It protects us against illusions. Malik nodded sincerely. I agree, sir. Science is valuable. It explains many things. How rain falls, how the body works, how stars are born. But I think faith is also a tool. It helps us understand what science cannot measure. He took a short breath, looked around for a moment. Some faces were hanging on his every word, then concluded. Science explains to us the comment. Faith helps us understand the why. This sentence hung in the air for a moment like a simple, clear, and difficult to contradict evidence. Mr. Carter stood there motionless. Then, for the first time in a long time, he smiled genuinely. Not the smile of an amused professor, but that of a touched man. You have a beautiful way of thinking, Malik. Keep that wisdom. It will take you far. At the back of the classroom, a student clapped softly. Another followed. Soon, a few quiet claps rang out, not in mockery or exaggeration, but as a shy, respectful acknowledgement of a rare moment of shared truth. And that day, in Mr. Carter's philosophy class, it wasn't science that triumphed, nor faith, but something in between. The awareness that there are bridges between reason and belief, that one does not necessarily negate the other, especially when they meet in the heart of a child who thinks honestly. In the following days, the atmosphere in the school is changing subtly. It's not a sudden upheaval, but a new breeze that blows through the corridors, light but persistent. Several students, previously discreet or even disinterested in philosophy classes, begin to approach Malik during breaks or after class. Some simply come to shake his hand. Others sit next to him in the cafeteria, more curious than ever. Malik, you really spoke like a grown-up the other day, said Brian, a boy who often wears headphones around his neck and never participates in class. You put into words something I was feeling but didn't know how to say. Other students, like Sophie, a bright but withdrawn girl, confide in low voices. I've always had faith, but I thought it should be kept hidden, as if it were a weakness. You showed that it was possible to talk about it without being ashamed. Malik listens, always with his characteristic calm, a mixture of humility and lucidity rare for his age. He doesn't try to convince. He doesn't preach. He listens, and he shares what he knows, what he believes, without ever imposing. For his part, Mr. Carter is also changing. The professor, until then confident in his method, begins to re-examine his teaching approaches. In the evenings, at home, he rereads his old lessons with renewed attention. He often thinks about Malik's words. Science explains the how, faith helps us understand the why. He realizes that he may have unwittingly closed some doors instead of opening them. He never intended to humiliate or impose an atheist vision, but in his scientific zeal, he had forgotten that students are not just brains to be filled, but hearts in search of meaning. So he changes. In the next class, he adds a new instruction to one of his reflection assignments. How can science coexist with a form of spirituality or personal faith? He didn't expect specific answers. He wanted his students to think freely. And in this, he took inspiration from Malik. A few weeks later, the high school is organizing a highly anticipated event, the Debate of Ideas, an annual meeting where student volunteers present their thoughts to an audience of parents, teachers, and other students. This year, at the request of several classmates and with the enthusiastic approval of the leadership, Malik is invited to speak. He wears a simple white shirt and dark pants, and maintains his usual calm despite the impressive crowd. His mother is present in the back, a discreet smile on her lips, her eyes shining with pride. Mr. Carter is there too, sitting in the front row, arms crossed, but his gaze deeply attentive. When his turn came, Malik stepped onto the stage. He looked at the audience respectfully, then spoke gently but confidently. I'm not here to convince you, or to tell you what to think. I'm here to share. Faith and science, in my eyes, are like two hands holding each other. One explores the visible world, the other seeks to understand what lies beyond this world. They are not enemies. They are like two different languages that sometimes tell the same story. When we look at the starry sky, science tells us about atoms, distances, and physical laws. Faith tells us about beauty, mystery, and gratitude. And sometimes, all we need to hear is the simplicity of a child to hear a great truth. A deep silence follows his words. Not an awkward silence, a dense, full, respectful silence. Then the applause begins, tentative at first, then growing. Mr. Carter, standing among the first, applauds warmly, almost moved. After the debate, several teachers come to congratulate him. A literature teacher says, "You have just done what many adults do not dare to do. Speak about faith with humility and intelligence." Mr. Carter approaches him last. He doesn't say much. He simply extends his hand. "Thank you, Malik. You taught me something I hadn't understood for a long time." And in this gesture, there is no longer the teacher and the student. There are two human beings who recognize each other in their common quest, that of truth, whether scientific, spiritual, or simply human.